But the idea that we should say, hey, why don't you allow your body to be experimented on so we can determine whether or not it's harmful, I think is just a big mistake.
But I also have suffered from an eating disorder where I do remember what it was like to sometimes look in the mirror and you would actually see someone that was totally different from who you were in the mirror. At no point did any adult in my life say, oh, I'm going to help you in your misunderstanding. I can't believe we're back here again.
Hello and welcome to Quite Right. My name is Michael Gove and I'm editor of The Spectator.
And I'm Madeline Grant, assistant editor and parliamentary sketch writer at The Spectator.
And this week we'll be looking at trans wars, asylum madness and Christmas craziness.
This week, Michael, the government has delayed publishing its guidance following the Supreme Court's ruling on gender. And we know this because the Times have leaked part of the equality watchdog, the EHRC's report last week. Why is the government dragging its heels?
I think that there's a manoeuvre here on the part of Bridget Phillipson, who, as well as being Education Secretary, is the Minister for Women and Equalities in the Cabinet. I think that she is waiting for the current head of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, a marvellous woman called Kishore Faulkner, to stand down, and her term is coming to an end. There's a new Labour appointee who's going to be in place. And I think that there's a desire on Bridget Phillipson's part to water down or dilute the clarity of the guidance that has been produced by the EHRC, following on from a judgment in the Supreme Court which affirmed the importance of biological sex. And the reason why Bridget Phillipson might want to water this down is because the Labour Party is fundamentally split, and there is a significant group, probably a majority, on the backbenches who dislike the Supreme Court judgment, dislike the emphasis on biological sex, and are in the grip of, if not ideological fervour, certainly a position that holds that trans rights were eroded by this judgment, and they're looking to Bridget Phillipson to push back.
Yeah, it's because my understanding was that Bridget Phillipson was actually on the more rational, sensible end of Labour ministers when it comes to this issue. But what's interesting to me is that around the same time that we're seeing this happening, Wes Streeting, another one who seemed to take a more realistic stance about biological reality, his department has just authorised an extensive study which will use puberty blockers on young children. I thought we were past all of this now.
Right.
I thought that had been banned and we had finally begun to see sense. But I do wonder if in both cases you have people who are somewhat jostling for position within the party. They know that the top job may be going free sooner than we might think. And this issue is not just divisive within the party, but I think it's probably an issue on which you can't afford to alienate the progressive members of the Labour Party either.
I think that has to be a calculation. So in both cases, both Bridget Phillipson, less overtly, but also Wes Streeting, had indicated that they were broadly on the gender-critical rad-fem side of the argument. So as well as the potential positioning of either Bridget Phillipson or Wes Streeting, or both, in order to appeal to Labour members who are worried that their party is doing nothing that they would consider progressive. There's also the nature of the Cass report, which was the work that was commissioned from this very distinguished paediatrician who's now in the House of Lords, Hilary Cass,
Yes.
which looked at gender reassignment surgery and treatment, concluded that what was going on in the Tavistock clinic was a mistake, but it left open the door to trials of puberty blockers to see if they worked. And this, I think, was a well-intentioned manoeuvre on Hilary Cass's part, but it left the door open to precisely this situation that you described.
I mean, part of the reason that she was right to point out that the official evidence base is appalling, and this is what has obviously led to this trial. But there have been an awful lot of children in Britain that have undergone this process. Thousands have gone through the Tavistock clinic. And part of the problem has been that those clinics have been reluctant to allow researchers to track the outcomes for the children that have passed through the service. We could do that work right now. and follow up and see how people are doing and what have been the medical consequences.
It's where morality, I think, has to trump what one might otherwise consider to be legitimate in terms of scientific method. It also offends to me, just against common sense.
Yeah.
So you don't need to have randomized control trials of leeching, cupping, or trepanning to know that applying blood-sucking creatures or drawing blood from the ill or boring a hole in someone's head is not necessarily going to contribute to their flourishing and well-being. Similarly, it's just wrong.
Yeah.
Straightforwardly wicked to say to someone under the age of 18, we are going to administer drugs to you which will delay the onset of a natural process, and which, if taken to extremes, as people like Janice Turner, the brilliant Times journalist, has pointed out, mean that not only is their development arrested, but the capacity later in adult life to live full adult lives.
Yes.
To enjoy all sorts of intimacy and fulfillment with others is curtailed, if not eliminated. It's children that we're talking about here. And the idea that we should say to troubled children, because by definition, if you're questioning your gender identity as a teenager, you need help and support and sympathy. But the idea that we should say, hey, why don't you allow your body to be experimented on so we can determine whether or not it's harmful, I think is just a big mistake.
And also, it's coming after the Supreme Court ruling has basically made explicit that it's not going to be possible for children who identify as a different gender to go to school as the gender as which they identify. So in a way that just as society is becoming more clear that it won't participate in the fiction of this so-called different gender, they've decided that now is the time to experiment on children. I was really astonished to hear about this. I can't think how it got ethical approval. It makes me feel like actually an issue on which society had finally come to a sort of sensible, realistic conclusion after many years of prevarication. And it feels like we're back to square one again. I mean, I don't know, I feel very passionately about this issue because when I was a child, I firstly had quite a period of wanting to be a boy, but I also have suffered from an eating disorder where I do remember what it was like to sometimes look in the mirror and you would actually see someone that was totally different from who you were in the mirror. At no point did any adult in my life say, "Oh, I'm going to help you in your misunderstanding." Everyone around me was engaged in trying to prevent you from starving yourself and doing harmful things. And it just, to me, feels like the ultimate abdication of responsibility that we owe to young people.
Yes, and there are some people who've argued that denying these treatments and these interventions to children is a form of cruelty. But actually, it's the perpetration, I think, of cruelty, as you say. And I sympathise with the position in which you find yourself. I mean, I had members of my family who, at different points in their teenage years, needed support and consideration and care, and would now look back and think, thank heavens that the impulses that I had at that time, which I genuinely felt incredibly strongly, and hated the fact that I was being told that I couldn't follow through on. I'm so glad that I was protected from them at that time. We know it's the case, particularly as it happens with boys, that impulse control, when you're young, isn't really mastered. The brain isn't really in a position to regulate those impulses until after the age of 18. But we've got to have a cut-off point somewhere. That's the age of maturity. That is the age at which someone can willingly, I think, consent to interventions. And whether I or not I might think that they are mistaken in going down that path, they can exercise a degree of control, obviously, once they're 18. But beforehand, as the body itself is developing, it seems to me to be quite wrong. And it's striking. I know that some of those who had resisted this case were sent, people in government, people in the Department of Health, were sent messages saying that they were essentially responsible for the
Yes.
suicide
Oh, yes, that
of
kind
teenagers. And again, it's grotesque.
emotional blackmail of the highest order, and just really, especially when it kind of implies that after you've transitioned, life will become a doddle.
Yes.
You'll now be in the right gender and everything will be okay, which is such a lie to tell people. It's extremely difficult. Having a dysphoria of any kind is traumatic and difficult. Why lie to people like that and tell them that all of their problems can be solved with this one not very simple intervention, as it turns out, one that will change your body forever. If you're biologically female, it may prevent you ever from being able to conceive, and if you have top surgery to breastfeed your child one day, taking away very, very seminal aspects of biology and carries significant and well-documented risks. I can't believe we're back here again.
No,
I cannot believe it.
One of the striking things as well is that I've talked to friends who are members of the LGB Alliance, which is a particular organisation which tries to draw a distinction between the rights, the position of lesbian, gay and bisexual people and the broader transgender issue. And again, one of the points that members of that organisation and many others make is that there is something almost homophobic in some of the arguments that are being made. So if you're a butch lesbian, if you're a tomboy, you should really be a boy. That if you're a boy and that you feel that you have a feminine way of looking at the world, if you are in any way gay or have gay feelings and they express themselves in a broader feminine outlook, well, obviously you must be a girl.
It's unbelievable. It's like essentialism, biological essentialism.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it actually denies the reality and variety of human experience. And what's striking is that friends like Joe Cherry, the former Scottish Nationalist Party MP, who's been out all her adult life, has fought for gay rights, feels incredibly strongly that there are people who are attempting to annex some of the arguments that she was making to allow herself to live her life in the way that she wanted and other friends to do so as well, attempting to annex those arguments in a way to try to, if not erase, to certainly undermine the idea that you can be a lesbian, lead a lesbian lifestyle, and that is full, normal, natural and fulfilling.
And where this overlaps with the transing of children is that in many cases, those children who are experiencing gender identity will turn out to be gay or lesbian, or in some cases to have undiagnosed autism. There are other reasons and lots of reasons why young people feel confused in their own bodies, especially around puberty. And as you say, to just leap for that one explanation that you were born in the wrong body is, extremely reductive. Who wants to live in a world in which there's only one way to express yourself as a man or woman? I thought that feminism was moving away from that. I thought we were beginning to agree on that. There are many ways to be a girl and many ways to be a boy.
Completely.
And what I find particularly insulting, actually, is that in much of the opposition to the bits of the leaked guidance that we have seen in the Times, one thing that seems to have really incensed people is the idea that trans people, or indeed anyone who doesn't present in the kind of conventional gendered way, could be challenged on their right to be in particular spaces. I think that's a very dishonest framing, because you're basically taking butch lesbians and perhaps more effeminate men, and you're trying to use them to make an argument that could restrict women's rights, and it's all done under the guise of be kind.
It is also the case that there's still an ongoing wrangle about women's sport. One would have thought that the case had been won for ensuring that biological males could not compete in women's sport. But I think it's the case that there is going through the courts, an effort to try to ensure that biological males can play in women's sports, in cricket and elsewhere. The person behind it is the person whose name, if attached to a cause, invariably, in my view, invalidates that cause, and that is Julian Maughan KC.
I didn't even know about this, and I knew you were going to say him.
And again, this guy, we probably shouldn't give him any more coverage, notoriety, name recognition, than he already enjoys. For people who are unfamiliar, he was the Brexit-hating, fox-killing, kimono-wearing KC who runs an organisation called the Good Law Project, which seems to delight in picking any literally perverse cause and trying to overturn common sense wherever it's found.
Agree, though, that he was right to kill the fox that was going after his chickens. You've got to defend your livestock by any means possible.
Look, I in ordinary circumstances, I completely understand why you would want to show paternal care for your chickens. But this is one occasion where I was on the fox's side.
Really?
Yes. No. If it's a fight between
enemy.
Jolien and Reynard, then I'm afraid I'm with fantastic Mr. Fox, and the chickens are just collateral damage. So, I mean, the guy is literally wrong about everything. There are some people who are wrong about most things, but even Zach Polanski has a good point or two. I mean, I think that
he's a stopped clock that somehow doesn't manage to be right twice a day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think also the other thing is that the trans issue is a sort of Rorschach test as well in a number of ways, in that you can tell, to my mind, within a political party, classically Labour, but other political parties, including the Conservatives, whether or not someone is basically fundamentally commonsensical by their stance on it. So, my heroine, Shabana Mahmood, resolute on this issue. Wes Streeting, thought he was a good guy, now worried.
Where were these people when Rosie Duffield was being hounded?
Well, there were other people, even people whom I might disagree with on other issues. So, Tonya Antoniazzi, who I disagree with profoundly on the whole question of
infanticide.
Exactly. Nevertheless, she's shown courage in this issue. And there's a very talented Scottish Labour female MP, Joni Reid, who's recently been elected, again shown courage on this issue.
There are more of the new intake.
Yes.
I think because they perhaps feel like empowered to speak up in a way that they didn't a few years ago.
Exactly.
But I do think that some of the political parties, particularly progressive bent, have this quite toxic group of predominantly men who are pushing this very vehemently. And Rosie Duffield has talked about the kind of group of bros in the Labour Party. I think the Lib Dems have a massive problem on their hands here. We don't talk about it enough.
100%. They're the worst.
They've received over £1 million in donations from a pharmaceutical company that makes puberty blockers. So they are totally compromised on this front. And their newly elected president, Josh Babarinde, is very much does not accept biological reality on this.
No, and Kishore Faulkner, the woman who I mentioned earlier, who's the head of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, was a Liberal Democrat. I don't think she's a member of the party anymore. I think, ex officio, because of that role, she'd have to leave it. But nevertheless, there's been no sisterly solidarity from Lib Dems towards her on this issue. And if listeners know of a single prominent Lib Dem who's taken a commonsensical view on this issue, please let me know. This is supposed to be the party of free thought and the party which is willing to encourage debate in its own internal policy making. But, while you can find some Lib Dems who are Eurosceptic, you can even find some Lib Dems who are anti-PR. I don't know a single Lib Dem who's embraced a gender-critical, radical feminist approach on this issue. If there is one out there, then please let me know so that we can praise you like we should.
There are Lib Dem women, but they've often been ostracised themselves by their own parties.
Yes.
I think there's a group called Lib Dem Voices for Women, but that is by no means been the mainstream interpretation. Yeah. And they have been ostracised, I suspect, in probably quite a similar way that for several years LGB Alliance, which you mentioned, was banned from the Labour Party conference.
Yeah, and the other thing, of course, is
they could only go to the Tory Party conference for some time, which is kind of insane because these people are not conservatives.
No. And the other thing is, it was the same in the SNP. The situation's got a bit better, I think, now. But Joanna Cherry, I mean, I disagree with Jo on so many things, but her courage on this issue, like Kate Forbes's,
absolutely,
has been great. And Scotland, even more than England, partly because of the SNP's hegemony on this issue, was gripped by this mania. But the pushback, I think, also happened because when Nicola Sturgeon was First Minister, the idea of a rapist, Isla Bryson, who identified as female going to a woman's prison, became the ne plus ultra of absurdity. And that meant that even those people who didn't want to get involved in this conversation because they felt that, as men perhaps, they would be seen as a crustily out of touch reactionary, recognized that the drift of opinion was indefensible and there needed to be a pushback.
Well, in the reporting that I saw about, probably it was in the Times when I was reading about the EHRC leak, is the public opinion on this, particularly with sport, is dramatically in favour of upholding single-sex environments. I think with sport it's something like 75%. But that means 25% of people perhaps take a different view.
Yes.
And that 25% probably accounts for a good number of the movers and shakers, potential voters and members of the parties we've mentioned. So you can see that what seems crazy, what may be completely unpalatable to the medium voter, carries some weight within the party.
Yes, and it's also the case that it's still, in some environments, brave and risky to stand up for a gender-critical view. The Sunday Times columnist Hadley Freeman was writing this weekend about a visit that she'd made to Cambridge, where there were 3 young female undergraduates who were taking a gender-critical stance and who had to put up with the most absurd and horrific bullying from others on campus. And of course, it's still the case with Kathleen Stock, while obviously a celebrated writer, when she visited Oxford recently, I think it was more than a year ago, but still recently, she required security protection before she would speak there. And of course, I'm singling out just one university. I'm sure the situation is better on other campuses. But nevertheless, it does seem to be the case that there are still, as you say, in the nurseries of talent where the next generation's leaders are expected to come from, this ideology seems to hold, and seems to hold also in a way which is curiously intolerant, as though there was something brittle about its defenders that they couldn't bear challenge.
I also just wonder how long the prevarication will continue, because we've seen how people we thought were fairly sensible, like Wes Streeting, will clearly say different things to different audiences. There's been footage of him at a LGBT conference saying that he felt uncomfortable with the ban on puberty blockers. He will say different things to different people depending on what is convenient to him, which has, I think, been a disappointing thing. But we've also got this. It actually feels like a very classically Starmerite way of doing things, that you have government by review and quango kicking things into the long grass of bureaucracy and therefore delaying actual resolution. In a way, it's more redolent like sort of Homerism rather than Starmerism.
Well,
there's a sort of element where like the medium is the message here, by kind of wrapping it up in yet another review, avoids having to actually make a decision.
Keir Starmer said there's no such thing as Starmerism. What he meant was, of course, that he had no strong core crusading convictions, but there is a Starmerism, which is an attachment to process, and that attachment to process, the rule of lawyers and judges, is, of course, coming under attack from the most impressive member of Keir Starmer's cabinet, Shabana Mahmood. We talked about the Home Secretary last week. It's impossible not to talk about the Home Secretary at the moment. The provisional legislation that she introduced last week, we discussed in the context of its comparison with Denmark, the country which has a female Social Democratic Prime Minister who's been exceptionally tough on asylum, migration and integration. And you suggested then, Maddie, that there'd be a pushback from the Labour left. And so it's come to pass. And Shabana Mahmood was in the House of Commons on Monday and on Thursday outlining her plans. Where did the pushback come from? How was it expressed? And do you think that Shabana Mahmood will be able to withstand that?
In answer to the question, where did it come from? I would say the usual suspects. I mean, no one's surprised that Stella Creasy stood up and talked about love is love. And let's not forget that they're in kind of pearl-clutching tones about the humanity, the humanity. And then you've got people like Tony Vaughan, who is the MP for Folkestone. I mean, crazy enough that we have a Labour MP for Folkestone. But he's from the sort of human rights industrial complex that birthed Starmer and Hermer. And he's obviously adamantly against these changes. You wonder what his constituents make of that. And there are other MPs to the left of the Labour Party. And in addition, you have groups like the Refugee Council that have opposed these changes. What will Shabana Mahmood be thinking? Well, I think she'll be thinking all her Christmases have come at once, because it plays most beautifully into the narrative that she is hoping to get across, which is that she's the trailblazer, she's the Iron Lady that's willing to speak inconvenient truths to her party and do what needs to be done. Most MPs seem fairly happy with it. I mean, there are probably more MPs who are in those fear for losing their seats to, let's say, a reform. There are actually not many Labour Lib Dem marginals. There are definitely some that are worried about the threat of a Zach Polanski figure. But that's a very good rump of MPs who are delighted by the move. I think Reform did Shabana Mahmood the most enormous favour by responding to her announcements by mocking up an AI picture that had Shabana Mahmood wearing like a Reform jersey.
Oh, yes, in her bedroom.
Yes, this gave Shabana Mahmood an opportunity to say, over my dead body. So she can say, oh, look, Reform are taking me so seriously that they think I've actually borrowed my policies from them. And also I get the opportunity to disavow them and say how terrible they are. But meanwhile, no one is actually talking about the detail of her policies, if it's actually going to work, if the numbers are going to go down, which is the only thing that she will ultimately be judged on.
It didn't surprise me, as you say, that Stella Creasy opposed it. Your sketch of Stella Creasy's response was brilliant, and it made me think that now, increasingly, when I hear Stella Creasy speak, I sometimes think it's not necessarily the case that this comes entirely from the heart. It's almost as though she's imagining herself in a biopic of her own life, and that these are the lines that she would like the Emma Thompson or Keira Knightley actress playing her to speak. When she says "love is love," you can
slightly American twang.
Oh, quite.
Yeah.
You can see in her mind the camera zooming in on her in the House of Commons, and then there's a cut to a kindly Saint Ella, the Mother Teresa of Walthamstow, throwing open the doors of her double-fronted Georgian mansion to the world's poor as she shows what true self-sacrifice is. But putting Stella to one side, I think the heart of the challenge to Shabana Mahmood, you're right, comes not so much from Stella Creasy or Tony Vaughan KC. It comes from when reality bites. The rhetorical pitch that she's made, I think, was very well judged. And as you say, the fact that Reform are saying, hey, she's basically one of us,
Yeah.
I think it discomforts Labour MPs, obviously, but it's exactly the portrayal that she'd like to have in the minds of the electorate. But the challenge is, will it make a sufficient difference? And the conversation at the beginning of last week about whether or not jewellery would be forfeited.
Again, played into her hands completely, because they're not going to do jewellery. No. So it gives the opportunity for the left to lose their rag about this, and for perhaps a lot of people who most people will not have read the proposals in detail. They've got better things to do, but they may hear something about jewellery being confiscated and think, oh, wow, these people really mean business.
Yeah.
So it's actually weirdly works to... on both sides of the argument, it's convenient to her?
Completely. And, obstacle one is that she has created, or is in the process of creating, new, safe and legal routes, admirable on one level, to have them. But the truth, the revealed truth of migration policy is that even as you close down one route, and it's not easy, if you open up another aperture anywhere else, that will rapidly expand. So way back when, previous governments were very effective eventually, in dealing with the asylum route that asylum seekers and economic migrants were using through the Channel Tunnel.
Yeah,
Precisely.
Yeah.
So the number of people who arrived here in lorries dramatically diminished, moved to small boats. Similarly, when it comes to legal migration, you can close down certain routes, people will find others. So as certain visa routes were more tightly policed, and they were, so, and also as, you had sort of fake language colleges being closed down, those who were determined to come here would find different routes. And then there were always, whether it was mildly dodgy or even semi-respectable higher education institutions that would dish out student visas, or...
Yeah, why do so many of them have a London campus? This is what I want to know.
Precisely. So Shabana Mahmood has also said, look, the whole way in which we look at asylum seekers will change and there will be different routes there. Again, I strongly suspect that she'll be able to narrow the path for some, but with every optional flexibility, there is the chance of exploitation. Now, it may be that she knows that, and it may be that she's playing a slightly longer game and she's saying to her party and to the country, this is as far as I can go now. We will see if this works. If it doesn't, then every route will have to be either tightened or closed. And it may be that she's playing the same strategy out when it comes to our membership of the ECHR. She says she's going to try to make sure that Article 3, Article 8 are addressed and hopes that that can deal with it. And it may be that she realizes that she has to be caught trying, as it were, that this may not work, or certainly may not work fully, and they may have to go further. But does she have the time?
Well, I mean, this is kind of one of the most important tests by which this government will be judged by the British public. So you would assume that it would be top of her pile. But Home Secretary is a famously nightmare brief. It has a lot of the very trickiest things that the country must grapple with. It also has, from a civil service perspective, it's an enormous department, but doesn't always seem able to, almost perhaps too big, too unwieldy to achieve its goals. I also wonder, how much we have already seen. It's not as if the last government didn't attempt to do something. They had to go with the Illegal Migration Act and the Safety of Rwanda bill, but we saw how both of these fell prey to legal challenge. Obviously, the Lords will have its say, I presume, and obviously the party of Starmer is not going to go any further in terms of the ECHR, so this does slightly bind her hands. I think you're right. She's basically said, this is as far as I can go, that my party will allow me. That is the limit of what she can achieve. So basically, this is it. What if it doesn't work out, then what else can she do?
Quite. There is an indication that her policies will have an effect in, funnily enough, what the Irish government have said. But we talked about randomised control trials earlier in one area. In a way, you have a sort of migration control trial, because the Irish government, if it carries on with its policies at the moment, believes that it will become an even more attractive magnet for asylum seekers. And the Irish Justice Minister, Jim O'Callaghan, has said that Ireland's own rules will be adjusted so it is not viewed more favourably than the UK by those seeking asylum. And I think that, that's instructive. If he felt that these were just Potemkin measures, he wouldn't have felt the need to move. But also, and please allow a wicked smile to play about my lips, it has been part of the self-conception of certain Irish politicians that the evil English are, tattooed xenophobes, whereas Irish eyes are always smiling when it comes to the new Ireland, the Rainbow Ireland, which welcomes people in from every background. But we know that Irish voters, like British voters, have limited tolerance for the exploitation of their migration system. And a point that I've consistently tried to maintain in the defiance of fashionable opinion is that Ireland is not magically more enlightened than England any more than Scotland is magically more enlightened than England. And it is part of the myth that we Scots, and certainly the Irish, try to spin, that the English were the oppressors, the original imperialists. And in Scotland and in Ireland, we understand what it is to be oppressed, so we have a natural kinship and feeling for others who have suffered from oppression elsewhere. All of that is nonsensical. The Irish and the Scots, like the English, have broadly the same social attitudes, broadly the same general political outlook, and the idea that there is additional moral and political virtue out of being, a Celtic nation of sanctuary is just so much phooey.
Well, I'm not that surprised when I see the Shinners seeking solidarity with the cuddly troops of Hamas,
Yes. No, and well, it's again, it's been part of an attempt by some to clothe Scotland's history or Ireland's politics in a greater level of virtue. And I think it's this demonization of England and the English voter, as though the English voter was somehow more atavistic, more Ramapithican, more, somehow ugly in every dimension.
Quite a lot of people called MacDonald. If you go to some of the graveyards in the outposts of the British Empire today,
well,
you go to Simla, you'll see probably a Campbell or two.
Yes. No. But
and let's not even talk about Canada, where
no.
you see more tweed than you would if you were in literally in the Western Isles.
Yes. No. It's a phenomenon. And you see it also amongst certain Scottish intellectuals. You can call it Tom Nairnism or Willie Dalrympleism, which is it's the belief that somehow the Scots, and I think the same thing applies in Ireland as well, have an ability to operate in a colourblind way, which the irredeemably racist and imperialist English don't have. I think it's nonsensical. And I think the other thing is that one of the strengths of Shabana Mahmood making the argument that she's making is she is a British Muslim woman whose parents came from Pakistan, making the argument that you need to control migration because our public services can't cope. Order needs to be maintained. The pace is dividing society, and that we need a common sense of British citizenship, which is unsettled if you have too many people arriving here from too many different cultures without requirements on them to contribute. And I think that anyone could make that case because it seems to me to be eminently sensible. The fact that she's making it and representing the majority view of her constituents as well gives the lie to the idea that any form of belief in immigration control is somehow, the exclusive preserve of Millwall fans, Nigel Farage's immediate family, and Spectator leader writers.
But I will just say that we saw this under Priti Patel.
Yes.
A Home Secretary of Ugandan Asian origin who talks extremely tough and often won the plaudits of the right-leaning press, but ultimately presided over a massive liberalisation of the rules. I think the issue that we were talking about before this, the depressing step backwards in terms of biological reality and biological sex, that kind of proves that politicians are very good at saying one thing and doing another. The guidance is still languishing on Bridget Phillipson's desk.
Yes. And again, the action this day approach that Shabana Mahmood has taken has, I don't think it's, or it shouldn't be, exceptional for a minister to do that. And as you say, previous Home Secretaries, Priti Patel, Suala Braverman, were energetic. Whether or not they achieved everything they wanted to, well, they manifestly didn't, but they were energetic. But Shabana Mahmood stands out, as you alluded to earlier, because other ministers show that either passivity in the face of their backbenchers or that attachment to rule by quango or obsessive proceduralism that means that people are frustrated. Now, we will see, of course, with the budget, whether or not Rachel Reeves is an action this day, shake it up figure, or someone who is bound by the quango that is the OBR and the proceduralism that is the Treasury's way of operating. What I fear is that in all the areas that she should be doing good, the OBR will have held her back. And in all the areas that will wreak havoc on the economy, it will be action this day. And it may well be that she ends up doing more damage to the British economy than anyone since Harold Hardrada.
Well, it's that time of year. We're in the throes of the festive period. I guess Christmas period is what I should say. But it's amazing how one begins to co-opt the secular language even without really meaning to. We're also in the grip of Black Friday, which I swear used to just be a single day, but now it seems to be at least a week and possibly longer. There's just been this big expansion in everything. What do you make of this? When do you think that, for example, when should we put up our decorations? When should we start with the Christmas shopping?
I think that you should start with Advent. I think that this coming Sunday, even though it is the last day of November, it's also St Andrew's Day, is the first Sunday in Advent. I think that is the point at which one can begin. Now, one of our colleagues at The Spectator, Will Moore, took his children to a Christingle service. We can discuss whether or not those services are a good idea. Last Sunday, I was full of admiration for Will, making sure that the young Moores were there at church. But I think that all Christingle services, all anticipations of Christmas, must wait until at least the first Sunday in Advent, and therefore it's December. I know that the pressures are such on families that Christmas shopping, Christmas planning, Christmas tree purchases and so on may be set and trained beforehand. But I think while you can have technical rehearsals, don't have the dress rehearsal for Christmas until December.
And the music comes on earlier, you go shopping, it's all sort of jingle bells in September. Oh my God, I saw a real abomination at the supermarket yesterday. They were selling countdown calendars rather than advent calendars. I know, if you bought that and there wasn't a picture of Richard Whiteley behind every one of the doors, and you'd want your money back. But I think we're getting it all wrong, in part because Christmas ends more abruptly than it should.
Yes.
So I do believe that we ought to do things according to the ancient medieval calendar, where you basically keep going until Candlemas, which is February the 2nd. You keep your Christmas decorations up through January. We have this weird sort of everything or nothing where we've taken on all of the American consumerist element of Christmas, and we've kind of doubled down on that all through November. But then 12th night is generally when people wind everything down. And then, of course, you get this month of penance in January that people are increasingly taking up.
It's the wrong way around.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I don't much care for dry January, because I think actually January is the month where you most need a drink, especially if you leave your tax return a bit late and you're having to deal with handing over a big chunk of your income to Rachel Reeves to spend.
No, totally.
Spend on God knows what.
No. So the traditional point of Advent is that it is supposed to be a period prior to the feast of Christmas of relative restraint. And the whole point about Advent is that you prepare for the celebration and that you pine for the birth of Christ and for deliverance and for goodwill. And it should be a time, as it were, where you look towards the light in a period of darkness. So Advent overall, and whether or not you're religious, I think this should apply to everything, should be a period when you are relatively austere. You shouldn't be going for the extra cinnamon pumpkin latte or the Christmas tiffin cake at your Starbucks or Pret-a-Manger. Other coffee chains are available. It should be the period when you're concentrating on the preparation for the day, and as you say, for the aftermath. And the period of January, far from being a period of ascetic denial and gym going, that should be the period when you allow any belt tightening to be reversed and the notches to be let out, because it is a lowering and depressing time of the year. That is precisely the time that you need cheering up. So my own preference would be, and I hope this isn't too Scrooge-like, minimum amount of Christmas partying, maximum amount of January feasting, and it should be dry Advent and festive January.
Maybe moist Advent rather than not.
Well, no, I wouldn't say necessarily. I think yes.
Not torrential.
No. I think sparing. I think
just think the. I know I'm going to sound really Scrooge-like as well, but I do think that if you're not a child you have no right to be that interested in presents either.
Yes.
Presents are very important if you're a child, and if you have a child, go to town. But there's something about these videos that you see coming out of Black Friday, which used to just be a preserve of American shopping centres, but we now get in the UK too, which will be, some healthy young men punching an old woman out of the way to get their hands on a flat screen TV. And I kind of think, I feel a bit like Mark Corrigan in these moments. I think, is that what my granddad died for,
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, I recognise, of course, that this year, one of the emphases on Black Friday, coming as it does 2 days after the budget, is an effort by the retail sector, and indeed anyone else who's got anything to sell, to try to say to people who will inevitably have slightly less money falling on from the budget, please, can we have some of it? Please, can you keep the vital arteries of the economy running? So I completely understand the commercial and economic imperative. But the name itself, well, of course, it derives from American commerce. Again, I don't want to turn into John Knox, but the idea of Black Friday at the end of November seemed
padlocks on the swings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I do think that what you really want to have is, as I say, contemplation and preparation, and present giving should be about being with the person, the delight that they take in the fact that you've been thoughtful in that exercise. It is not a circus maximus in our malls and online, in which you attempt to barrel out of the way weaker brethren in order to get the bargain of the moment, in order to get the electrically powered UV facial, whatever it is, that happens to be the vogue item of the moment.
There's all the same sales after Christmas. This is what I've never understood. You will get your flat screen TV in good time, my friend. It doesn't need to be now, and it doesn't need to be at the expense of Doris there.
No, exactly. I think also that the way in which the year becomes flattened, and the way in which the specificity of particular seasons and the way in which either individual days or weeks become ironed out. We sometimes think that there are too many days, National Day of Transvisibility, National Day of Pencil Celebration, or whatever it might be. But actually, sweep all that away, what we tend to have are particular seasons, the massive run-up to Christmas, the massive run-up to Halloween, dry January, and then the race to think about winter sun. Actually, if we went back to understanding Advent, Septuagesima, Candlemas, and so on.
Lent.
Precisely.
Yes.
Then a rhythm to the year, both more various and more glorious, would appear.
Exactly. And Lent is actually much more, if people are doing Lent properly, it's much more achievable and realistic than I think having a month of no fun, no nothing, and almost like enforced anti-jollity, because so many other people are doing it that even if you did want to go to the pub, it might be hard to find someone that will come with you. Whereas what many people don't know about Lent, in fact, I only learnt this when I started dating a vicar who told me, was the fact that you don't actually, on Sundays are considered a feast day. They are considered a mini feast of the resurrection. And they actually are not, it's not cheating, because the Sundays are not considered part of Lent. Otherwise, Lent would be 46 days long. You are well within your rights to have a glass of something nice if that's what you're giving up, or some chocolate on every Sunday. Precisely.
It is not a Puritan straitjacket. It's just a way of getting you to think about sacrifice, but also to celebrate at the right moment. As we get closer to Christmas, I'm sure it will be the case that Spectator readers and Quite Right listeners will be thinking about the gifts that they should give their own loved ones. Shall we, next week, draw up the perfect list of sound presents that, as a Spectator reader or a Quite Right listener, you should think of? This doesn't necessarily mean that these will be the gifts that we may be giving, though they might be, our friends and family. But shall we try and draw up 5 gifts for the man and 5 gifts for the woman in your life that satisfy Spectator sound criteria.
Absolutely. So I think this is why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. The Establishment by Owen Jones, Chavs by Owen Jones. Yeah, that sort of thing. Perfect.
Yes, and where you can get a kefir, cut price, or indeed your progress flag. We'll be running through all of them, and we will probably also have a drop-down menu and a Black Friday 10% off offer. But Maddie and I will be back actually later this week to look at the budget fallout as well as answering your questions, and back next week to consider what's gone wrong in this country, but also what remains quite right.